Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to the Booms and Bus Show. My name is Jonathan Davis. Today is Monday, the 4th of June 2018, show number 55 of the Booms and Bus Show. For new listeners, the Booms and Bus Show is about free market capitalism, about libertarianism, about ripping apart the nonsense that is socialism, the lies that come out of socialists' mouths and every other orifice that you can think of. On this week in history, on the 26th of May, 1944, we see a photo taken by an SS officer in Auschwitz-Birkenau. We see lots of Jewish men, women and children standing or sitting in what looks like a field. And we focus in on a segment of the photo, and a toddler of about 2 years of age has picked up a flower and is handing it, arm outstretched, to another child, a boy of about 9 or 10. Minutes later, everyone in that photo is gassed. And you tell me that socialism is a good thing? If you truly believe that, then you are blind to your own evil. 29 years ago today, 1989, on the 4th of June, scores of peaceful student demonstrators were in the centre of the capital city in a place which will go down in infamy, like Auschwitz-Birkenau, Tianneman Sq. They were murdered by the Chinese communists. The event has now been erased in the Chinese history books. It's banned from the internet in China, like the Holocaust. We must never forget the evils of socialism. I'm delighted to report that now, only a week and a half after the petition online was started, over 500,000 online signatures for the Free Tommy Robinson petition have been collected. It does seem likely we're heading for 1 million. As to whether or not that'll make any blind bit of difference whatsoever, I doubt it, frankly. There are many serious people saying that Tommy deserves everything that he's getting. I think they're missing the point. The point is that there doesn't appear to have been any due process. He was found guilty before being proven whatever. And there's no way on earth that he was in any way affecting the case on which he was reporting, because they'd already been found guilty. All that those monsters were in Leeds court for was for their sentence. So they could not prejudice, he could not prejudice the trial. The trial was over. And Nigel Farage and Spiked Online don't seem to get this. And this is horrific. I don't know if his name's John or Jonathan Booth. This is what he wrote, I think, on Facebook. It was copied and pasted into Twitter. As listeners will know, I've never opened a Facebook page in my life, and so far so good. I hope I never do. Well, after 22 years in the fire service as a firefighter for Nottinghamshire, yesterday I had a phone call from the fire service saying that I've been suspended from duty with immediate effect, and I had to hand in my on-call alerter and photo ID card. On asking for what reason this was happening, I was told I was going to be investigated on some of the content I'd recently put on Facebook. The only things that I had recently put on Facebook was regarding Tommy Robinson and how I think it's disgusting that he's been arrested and locked up, and the dirty Muslim pedos, rapists, child molesters that he was reporting on at the time have been bailed and will no doubt get away with it. Freedom of speech in this country has definitely been taken away, and in years to come, hopefully, all the do-gooders and lefties will look back and realise what a huge mistake they've made. But it will be too late by then. Since yesterday morning's phone call from them, I have since handed my notice at the fire service. From now on, I will say what I feel is right and do what I can for this country, even if the PC twats in the fire service want to carry on in their blinkered little worlds, pretending everything is okay. Trust me, everything is not, in capitals, okay. Firefighter Booth, signing off. 22 years, no doubt a hugely experienced firefighter. No doubt, Mr. Booth, you've built up enough savings, probably paid off your mortgage, and you've got a good retirement fund as well. Maybe you're close to the age of 50, is it, or 55 these days for firefighters to get your pension. But I salute you, sir, for taking the action that you have. I suspect you'll be okay whatever you do. I suspect also that the pen pushers in their dark uniforms, your bosses, your boss, his boss, the area commander, I suspect they are now regretting very much that they did what they did. And I'll bet they're now wondering, if they do it again, who else will resign? The British Fire Service has lost an excellent individual with incredible integrity. A sad loss. This Saturday, the 9th of June, 3 p.m. in London, there will be another demonstration standing in unity for freedom for Tommy Robinson. 3 p.m. in London. Look out on your social media for the venue. I don't know many details about what I'm about to say, but I'll read you what I've printed off, and no doubt you can go and look to see any more about it. Melanie Shaw blew the whistle on sexual abuse at the Nottingham Beechwood Children's Home in the 1980s. She alleges that politicians, including Tory cabinet ministers, were amongst the clients of a child abuse brothel, where she and other children under state care were abused and murdered. She has been arrested by police, tried in a secret court hearing on unknown charges where the records have been kept secret. She is sentenced to 2 years in prison, where she has been kept in solitary confinement. Melanie Shaw, And the caption is, "Who's afraid of Melanie Shaw?" Yes, I think we'd all like to know. And how is it possible that she is in prison? Moving over to Rotherham, where council staff seized and destroyed damning evidence of a hidden child sex abuse scandal. The alleged cover-up has been reported just days after it emerged. The abuse of 1,400 girls went uninvestigated for 16 years. Officials are said to have ordered a raid on the town's Young People's Service Centre and seized nothing but the details of victims, offenders, and grooming cases that would have contributed to a landmark report in 2000. This evidence was not available at the time of the report. I'm taking this from the Times newspaper. Even after several critical reports into the council's failure to deal with child abuse, Joyce Thacker told the Rotherham Safeguarding Children Board that she did not want it to focus entirely on child abuse. Minutes of a meeting in March this year show she, quote, reiterated, unquote, that the council, social services and police, get this, quote, need to retain a sense of proportionality with regard to child sexual exploitation, unquote. Mrs. Thacker, who earns the miserly sum for a public servant in the shires, out in the sticks, where house prices are less than a half of what they are in London, she earns £115,000 a year. Plus, no doubt, she's on a 60th pension, 1/60th for every year of service. So, 40 years of service, she gets 2/3 of whatever her final salary is as a pension. Fully index linked, of course. You're talking about something like a £2 million pension pot after 40 years in the public sector. Mrs. Thacker said the issue of sexual exploitation made up just, quote, 2.3% of safeguarding work in Rotherham, unquote. Adding, quote, although it is a very important issue, really, Miss Thacker? You just said it's only 2.3%. Child neglect is a much more significant problem in the borough, unquote. Well, I guess that depends on your point of view, doesn't it, Mrs. Thacker? Do you have any young daughters? Did you? I suspect you didn't. Great respect for the UKIP Malud, Malcolm Pearson. He's written to Sajid David, the Home Secretary, who, of course, is ultimately responsible. No one's responsible in the United Kingdom. Theoretically responsible for what happens in prisons, saying, if Tommy Robinson is murdered or injured in prison, Pearson and others will mount a private prosecution against Javid as an accessory or for misconduct in public office. Good on you, Lord Pearson. Someone tweeted that they got this A5 flyer through their door from a crowd called For Public Purity. This is going to be difficult to read, but I'll give it a go. Yep, because it's white on red. Okay. This area is home to a large Muslim community. Please have respect for us and for our children and limit the presence of dogs in the public sphere. About us. Keeping the purity of the public space enables the Muslims remain untainted and without blemish. Bad English. As part of this effort, we have chosen to address one of the aspects that can have a detrimental effect on the purity of the public space, with the aspect being the presence of dogs who are considered impure in Islam. Facebook, public purity, 4, the number 4, publicpurity.org. Well, my first response to that is, how dare they? My second response is, I seem to recall there were people in the 1930s and 40s in Germany who talked about Aryan purity. And of course, we've had xenophobes and racists, ideologues who have talked about purity of the blood and so on, largely since we've known about blood. And this is what Muslims are putting out. I don't know where it is. According to London police, and you know, I saw a tweet of the actual document, the definition of Islamophobia includes, and by the way, I might now be getting arrested because of this, it includes suggesting that Islam is sexist. Well, the fact that in Sharia law, a woman's standing has the equivalent of a man, is that right? Equivalent of half of a man, I think I'm right in saying. So in a Sharia court, whatever a woman says only has half the weighting of a man. Apart from anything else that these monsters do, that seems to me to be pretty sexist. Or that Islamism exists as a political ideology, that also apparently is Islamophobic. Well, the suggestion that Islamism is not a political ideology is unbelievable, because that's exactly what it is. Moving on to some interesting developments in Italia. So we've seen, of course, 5 Star and the League win the general election. And then the so-called non-partisan president says, no, you can't have Signor Salvini as your finance minister, Chancellor of the Exchequer, because he's made some negative comments about the euro and the EU. He's 81 years old, this Paolo Savona. Sorry, I said something else, didn't I? I thought it was Salvini. Bit confused. Yes, he is Eurosceptic. He's very Eurosceptic. He's suggested that the euro is designed to benefit Germany, and that ordinary Italians have not really gained anything from nearly 20 years of euro membership. Yeah. Tell me what's wrong with those statements. Incidentally, I want to interject myself at this point. I want listeners to remember that the EU and the euro are not the font of our problems. The font of our problems are even deeper than that. It's called socialism. The reason why the British economy is lackluster at 1 or 2% per annum growth, and of course the bulk of the growth goes to the top 1, 5 or 10%, depending on your point of view, is because of our socialism in society. Never mind what went on in Greece or in Italy. That's the reason why Greece and Italy are basket cases. It's because of socialism. It's not because of the euro and the EU. Specifically, Savona called the euro a German cage, and he worried that Italy was about to follow Greece down the tube. The Italian president said, following the guy who was going to be the prime minister, who resigned because he wasn't getting his finance guy. So the president asked some bloke I've never heard of, Carlo Cottarelli, to form a government. And isn't it interesting? This would now be the 5th consecutive Italian prime minister who's unelected. And still the Remainers call the EU democratic. So Cottarelli says, yeah, fine, I'll take the job. And he promptly made this Savona bloke Italy's main point man for European affairs. He has said that after being sworn in, he would ask his civil servants, quote, how to reduce the number of arriving migrants and increase the number of expulsions, unquote. He said, the good times for illegals are over. Get ready to pack your bags, he said at a rally on Saturday. Italy and Sicily cannot be Europe's refugee camp, he went on. Nobody will take away my certainty that illegal immigration is a business, and seeing people make money on children who go on to die makes me furious. This Savona or Salvini, he sounds a pretty good guy, doesn't he? Well, we'll see how that goes. Euro area headline inflation has surged to 1.9% this month. In May 18. This is the highest for over a year, and as inflation continues to build globally, and particularly in the West, and you know I've been going on and on and on about inflation for the last year or two, it's just now a matter of time when, for example, the European Central Bank will reduce its quantitative easing. I wouldn't suggest at this stage that they're going to raise interest rates, but as a first stage, they'll stop printing money with abandon, just pumping it into the system. And also, of course, it brings it closer and closer to when the UK will have to raise interest rates. As I wrote about in my recent Booms and Bust report, in fact, just last week. If you're not getting the Booms and Bust report, just send your email to jd@theboomsandbustsshow.com, jd@theboomsandbustsshow.com, and your full name. You'll never be junk mailed or GDPR'd. I'm reminded of a disgusting statistic, which I'd totally forgotten about. When the coalition came in 2010, one of the better things that they did was cap state benefits. Because remember, for goodness knows how long, there was the grotesque situation that families were being put up in veritable mansions in inner central London on £100,000 a year just for the accommodation. Well, they put a stop to that. And of course, the landlords were raking it in on the state. They were killing themselves laughing. They were getting massive house price growth, and the state, I mean, it's just unbelievable. However, it doesn't make it much better to hear that the benefits cap still today is equivalent to a salary of £33,500 a year. Listener, that's materially more than the average earnings in the UK, which are in the low to mid 20,000s. Utterly, utterly grotesque. No wonder we have so many who can't be bothered working. And don't tell me it's a language issue. There's jobs where you can work. I mean, we've heard of factories, whole factories, where they've taken on Polish-speaking managers in order to employ and supervise the workers. It can be done. Why are we not tightening up on those who will not work as opposed to cannot? Why are we not doing it? After all these years and decades, we're still not doing it. I'm not going to do trickle-down so-called nonsense, just emphasising yet again that the rich are getting richer and the poor aren't. Okay, this is an interesting technological advancement. We've talked about driverless cars, driverless taxis in the past. It's getting quicker and quicker and getting closer and closer. According to media reports, Waymo, which is the driverless section of the Alphabet group, Alphabet owns Google, Waymo, W-A-Y-M-O, is going to be launching 62,000 Chrysler vehicles, adding to its fleet in anticipation of launching its self-driving transportation service perhaps this year. And that says to me, if it's not going to be 2018, it will be 2019. My goodness. I would have thought within 5 years in the UK there will not be a taxi driver. That's what I would have thought. But we'll see. I've talked about hundreds of millions globally losing their jobs. I mean, have you ever seen the movie Elysium starring Matt Damon? Set, I think from memory, it was either the late 21st century or it was the 22nd century. I can't remember. But do check out Elysium. It's coming. It's so obvious it's coming. So, there are much more worthy causes, it would seem, if one is truly, honestly interested in human rights. In 2017, there were 39,000 deaths in Syria, and there were 2.8 million Google News results following searches. 2.8 million for 39,000 deaths. Afghanistan, there were 23,100 deaths, 2 million Google results. Iraq, 13,200 deaths last year, 2.6 million Google News results. Myanmar and Somalia, 11,700, 1.6 million. Ethiopia and Yemen and Libya, 4,300 deaths, 1.9 million. Am I saying those deaths are worth little? I'm certainly not saying that. Wait for the punchline. I'm saying that for all those thousands and thousands of deaths, there were all those millions and millions of Google News results. And remember what I said. There are much more worthy causes, it would seem, if one is really interested in human rights. In Gaza last year, there were 96 deaths. Not 96,000 or 9,600. 96. How many Google News results? 3.2 million. Tell me there isn't some socialism, anti-Semitism here, and so on going on, because of course there is. So they talk about it, and they pretend that it's the biggest issue in the world. Do you know, I've got a friend, I had dinner with her, with my wife, I don't know, several years ago, 10 years ago maybe, I can't quite remember, in her house. We're having dinner on her dinner table, We were talking about the news. We were talking about Israel. And I asked her, because I was struck by some of the things she was saying. I said, it's a matter of interest. How big do you think Israel is, in terms of size of the country? And she said, perhaps half of Europe. Because this is what ignorance believe. Because it's in the news all the time, it must be an absolutely massive, grotesque country taking over the Middle East. I remind you, listener, it's the size of Wales. It's a fraction of the size of Florida. Half of Europe. Israel isn't just a better place to live than its neighbouring states. It's a better place to live as an Arab. Suppose you were given a choice before birth. You could be born into an average income Muslim household in Algeria, Iraq, Israel, Libya, Syria, Yemen. How long would you hesitate before you would say Israel? A couple of weeks ago, as Israel celebrated its 70th birthday, scores of columnists drew attention to its achievements, which are dazzling. Israel is, by the standards of its region, a uniquely free, democratic, open, and wealthy society. As the Cato Institute notes, quote, average income per capita dwarfs those in the neighbouring countries, allowing for superior social outcomes, including higher life expectancy, lower infant mortality, and universal provision of drinking water and electricity. Israelis are better educated, they own more computers, and they have more access to the internet, more access to the internet. Maybe I should add, they have access to the internet. Even though, when it comes to tough breaks, Israel is in a league of its own. The Jewish state was attacked, and many people don't know this, but this is a simple fact of history. The Jewish state was attacked within hours of its birth by the combined armies of 5 vastly larger neighbours. It has been in a condition of semi-permanent conflict ever since 1948. It's been forced to divert resources and manpower to national defence. Many of its neighbours refuse to trade with it or allow its citizens to enter their territory. Yet, it has become one of the most innovative and prosperous places on earth. Never mind the regional comparisons contrast Israel with other territories that acquired independence from Britain at around that time, such as Burma or Pakistan. They began with a similar political infrastructure, including the vast benefit of the common law. Yet none of them matches Israel's record when it comes to multi-party democracy, an independent judiciary, secure property rights, free speech, pluralist media, or readiness to punish corruption. Many countries that became independent after World War II implemented the idiotic statist doctrines that were then in fashion. But Israel has moved on from those, shifting, especially under Prime Minister Netanyahu, from a kibbutz culture to a startup culture. What was the magic ingredient? Rough neighbourhood, arid soil, difficult trade? We're left with the obvious explanation. The people who settled in Israel were unusually gifted and energetic, as migrants often are, and were driven, again, as migrants often are. Think of the Ugandan Indians, for example. They were driven by a dream of freedom. The consequences of their drive and know-how have been extraordinary. Indeed, says the writer at Cato Institute, I can think of only one other former British possession that has thrived to the same extent. Its people, too, were driven by a dream of freedom, and they likewise drew on a common law tradition of limited government. The Cato Institute listener is in the United States. Let's move on to economics. We're at 35 minutes. So the NHS, we're told time and time again, is strapped for cash. Indeed, Ruth Davidson, the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, she got herself a front page headline in the Scotsman national newspaper on the 30th of May last week. The headline is very simple. It says exactly what she wants. Stop cutting taxes and save the NHS. Well, I can tell you that that would not have given so much prominence if it wasn't going to happen. She's obviously got it agreed with socialist Theresa May, like Edward Heath, like John Major, like David Cameron, like all of them put together. They are socialists. Bring back capitalism. And just to show you how strapped for cash the NHS is, it's been reported that they've spent £100 million on translators in the last 5 years. Yeah. They've also been recruiting social media managers. Do not tell me the NHS is strapped for cash. In New York, a very depressing fifth suicide by a license-holding taxi driver in just over 5 months. The license is represented by a medallion. You buy this medallion, you get to be what is in effect a hackney cab, yellow cab driver in New York. The medallion system was created to limit the number of cab drivers, aka a trades union. Yes? A closed shop. Yes? Socialism. Yes? But ride-sharing apps, such as Uber and Lyft, have rendered it useless, says Ravi Desai, Executive Director of the New York City Taxi Workers Alliance. I wonder how much that trades union chief executive earns. These medallions, I remember in the 90s and 2000s, were going up double-digit % per annum, and the prices were becoming crazy. At one point, to get a license, to get a medallion, it was costing $1 million. $1 million for a license? And they didn't realize that that was a bubble? Well, some of these people, a lot of these people were spending between $500,000 and $750,000 for the medallion. A few years after the introduction of the ride-sharing apps, and they're looking at a cost now of $175,000. There is no way on earth that the people who paid hundreds of thousands are ever going to get their money back, because the idea is that you bought it and then you sold it when you retired and so on, and it was your retirement fund. How ridiculous to put all your eggs into that one basket. Patently stupid. Do I feel sorry for those who committed suicide? Of course I do. But come on. Let's be a little bit intelligent about our finances and our careers, shall we? Just going back on the Conservatives, and they're going to raise taxes. They're going to put more into the NHS. You've got the likes of Priti Patel who are out there saying, no, we should be conservative with a small c. We should be free market capitalist. We should be low taxes. I got news for you, Mrs. Patel. The Conservatives haven't been conservative since 1991. It ain't going to happen. It just isn't going to happen. So I see that SSE, one of the big household suppliers of gas and electricity, is hiking its prices by 6.7% in July, which is 2.5 times the rate of inflation. No, that's not right, is it? Inflation's 2.5%, 3%. No, it's 1.5 times the rate of inflation, general inflation. And the other big suppliers, they did their big announcements back in March. So, and it was at similar levels, 5, 6, 7%. No doubt the Office for National Statistics will play down the relevance. No doubt they will ensure that gas and electricity plays a much smaller part in our basket of shopping that they say that they have when they come out with the inflation index. But there is yet another example of inflation. Do not tell me that we have low inflation in the West and in this country. This nonsense that we've only got 2.7% consumer price inflation. Absolute, utter nonsense. There's example after example. Transportation, housing, obviously. And yet, we've only got 2.7%. We've got inflation much bigger than that. But of course, they manipulate the inflation index for their political masters. And they call themselves non-partisan civil servants. Yeah. Talking about inflation, I said that Turkey is heading alongside South Africa to be the next Venezuela. They're officially announced, no doubt it's nonsense, their officially announced consumer inflation is now up to 12.15% year on year to May. That is, of course, because their currency has been absolutely collapsing. I'll bet the true rate of inflation is more like 25%. The poor people of Turkey. So, quickly move on to markets. 43 minutes. It's going to be a shorter show this week, I've no doubt. So, from early February, we saw the stock markets fall. Emerging markets have gone down nearly 20%. That's a sizable correction, no doubt. And you read and heard lots and lots of doomsters and gloomsters. But if you were regularly listening to JD, you would have heard me say, stuff of nonsense. It's a bull market. Stocks are in a bull market. They're in a bull market trend until the trend conclusively reverses. Well, the Nasdaq's back to all-time highs. The S&P is breaking up, and it just needs a tad more for an attempt at new all-time highs. In the month of May, the Dow Jones went up over 1%. The S&P went up over 2%. The Nasdaq went up over 5% in May 2018. This is not a bear market behaviour at all. So I do hope that in your pensions you didn't reduce your exposures to the equity markets. I mentioned about a pension scheme that I'd heard of that was bailed out because it sold a massive London property where it used to do its business. Of course, London commercial property done fantastically well over the years. It bailed itself out. It's now got no other assets. It now rents a property, a cheaper property further outside of central London. It has no assets. It's got no headroom for any future errors. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to flog the pension scheme to an insurance company, so that the insurance company will take on the current and future liabilities. In other words, the pensioners. Well, that's fine and well. But I heard that in this time of turmoil in the stock markets, they've put £1 million of stocks into cash. The absolute utter idiots. How many times can these ill-informed, voluntary, amateur pension trustees mess up on behalf of all the pension members? Clearly, many times. So next Tuesday and Wednesday, that's the 12th and 13th of June, the Federal Open Markets Committee will be meeting, and very likely, certainly according to the market, they will be raising the US Fed funds rate to 1.75%. That will be the seventh raise from 0 to 1.75. Whilst the UK, the Bank of England, under carnage, as I wrote last week, the most dovish central banker since the last one, has not raised interest rates at all. It's utterly, utterly pathetic while we see inflation rising and rising, and he does absolutely nothing about it because he's a shill for the bankers and for the politicians. It's quite utterly disgusting. And going into the FOMC, expect the dollar to continue strengthening. The chart is very strong. I know people are questioning it. They're laughing at me on Twitter, which is really weird because in the last month the dollar went up 7%, and all I've been doing is reporting that and saying again and again the chart is strong. The chart remains strong. And so what if it pulls back a little? The trend is up. And indeed, it might even continue rising beyond the FOMC meeting. But, it's not going to rise because they raise interest rates. They raised interest rates in 2017 and the dollar fell 10%. So, get out of your head that there's a direct inverse correlation between interest rates and the price of the currency. That's not the way the world works. So if the dollar continues rising and, even if it doesn't, gold is still fragile. I've been saying it for weeks and months. It got up to 1360. I didn't like it. It's below 1300. It went up above 1300. My God, the gold bugs came out in force and said, we said that it was going to rally. We said that it's going to the moon, and it's back below 1300 again. Stop listening to gold bugs. If you follow them on Twitter, stop following them. They're doing your head in. Medium term, yes, gold and miners are due a very big move, a very big positive move. But it just seems to me that we could yet see the mid-1200s before we see an amazing buy. And I say to you, if gold breaks 1380 and carries on its merry way, in other words, it's on a new bull market, it seems to me it's going to be heading for above 2,500. That could be worth hundreds of % in junior gold miners. But it's got to get above 1380 first. It's got to stay above, and it's got to look sustainable. If it does, we could be heading over a year or two to above 2500. I'm not joking. Uranium, the UK fund, the Geiger Counter Limited, GCL, it's back at the $20 area. It's been in the 18s. $20.40 is the 40-week moving average, and it's above the 10-week, and the 10-week is rising. And it seems likely that the 10-week is going to cross above the 40. We'll see if it happens, but it's a hugely bullish market longer term. US natural gas, the UNG ETF is now above for the second week, continuously closed above the 40-week moving average. Softly, again, could be another monster. Emerging markets, as I said, they had a sizable correction. But before the correction, which started in January, February this year, for the prior 2 years, it went up 100%. Of course it's going to have a correction when it does something huge like that. 100% in 2 years is absolutely, utterly massive. It's a major bull market. Could be a multi-year bull market. Don't worry about it. Government bond yields, if you're in government bonds, in your pensions and your long-term investments, I'm specifically talking about nominal government bonds here, as opposed to index-linked government bonds, where the government will pay you an inflation-linked interest amount every year. Nominal means the interest payment stays the same every year. Government bond yields are rising again. There may be still some short-term strength in government bonds, but it does look very much as if government bonds are in a big downtrend, which means long-term interest rates are in a big uptrend. En verra. The dollar, as I say, it's pulling back after a multi-week rally. Very, very strong rally, huge rally in fact. But it does appear that the longer term trend is down, but for the very short term, the trend is up. I mentioned the booms and bust report. You really ought to be receiving this and reading it if you haven't been getting it. It's free. Send me your details. I've given you the reasons there why I forecast a 16% fall in London house prices from 2017 to 2020. 16% fall from an average of 490k at the peak in 2017 to an average of 410k in around 2020. That's what I'm expecting. We shall see. Commodities generally rising strongly since early 2016. This is inflationary, which tends to lead to rising interest rates. No one can imagine, listeners of this show, normal people, you can't imagine house prices falling for years and years and years. You can't imagine it. You can imagine house prices falling for a couple of years, but it'll come back again. It always has. This nonsense idea, it always has. You're forgetting that the last 40 or 50 years is not this thing called always. It really isn't. In the second half of the 19th century, we had deflation and falling house prices. And if we see very long-term rising interest rates, we are going to see very long-term falling house prices. I can imagine it, because I can imagine very long-term rising interest rates. Quotes of the week. First of all, from Animal Farm by the great George Orwell, and this was what Squealer had to say. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. He would be only too happy to let you make your decisions for yourselves. But sometimes you might make the wrong decisions, comrades, and then Where should we be? Where indeed? Listen to the evils of socialism, listener. And now from 1984, George Orwell. Tell me if this resonates. Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street building has been renamed. Every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. It's coming. If you can't see it, you're fool. It's coming. But on a positive note, we can do good things for ourselves. One of the objectives of the Booms and Bust show is to help you develop a secure and comfortable retirement fund. I do not give advice. I talk about economics, and I most importantly talk about markets, and hopefully give you some ideas that you can go and find out about and make good investments. President Calvin Coolidge also said this, and I couldn't agree more. Nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful people with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan, "Press on," has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race. Listener, I've had a blast. I'll see you next week.